Hey everybody, it's Chris Volesky. I am here with a good friend of mine, Terry Fox. Terry and I have a little bit of overlap in some of the things that we see in our clinic. I do a lot of specialization in treating headaches and migraines, and Terry, you specialize in a type of acupuncture that maybe people aren't as familiar with, facial rejuvenation.
Yes, I got into that several years ago, studying with Ron Rosen down in Denver. He was my first facial acupuncture teacher. Since then, I've studied with Michelle Gellis, Denise Ellinger, Mary Elizabeth Wakefield, Trinal Kroom. I've studied with a handful of folks.
I actually took a couple weekends courses like continuing ed for facial rejuvenation acupuncture, and I did a clinical internship on this when I was first in practice. But it's not something that ever really gravitated toward.
I always thought it was just, it was fun for me because you got to see the transformation very quickly. I mean,
Mm.
it's subtle work, but still, when you know what you're looking for, it's like, ooh, man. Whereas with more of the internal medicine work, sometimes, it takes a few weeks before you start seeing progress. So it just drew me.
But yeah, you can see that like vibrancy in the face sometimes, right? Even right after a treatment, I noticed that.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess the reason I really wanted to bring you on here is, I do a lot of outreach and talking about different ways that people can manage their headaches, migraines, and of course, from a Chinese medicine standpoint, we're first and foremost looking at what the cause of the problem is, what things we can do at home, or what natural approaches we can take to managing headaches, and not only that, but identifying what the fundamental problem is to keep them from coming back. And then eventually, coming at it from a treatment standpoint where maybe things aren't managing so well. So we get into things like acupuncture. Of course, I do a lot of herbal medicine with my patients for headaches and migraines. But the thing I really wanted to chat with you about is I do have some patients that will come in and they've been doing Botox for their migraines, or they're curious about doing Botox for their migraines. And in some cases, they've had relief. In some cases, it's not working. And I know you're pretty well read on what Botox is, what it does to the body, and if there are, more long-term ramifications of doing this kind of thing. So, I mean, obviously you've got a patient population that is interested in that kind of thing and probably has used it. So that's my curiosity is, is this safe? Is there things that we should be looking out for? I mean, is there potential for long-term harm from that kind of thing?
That's a really good question. This is something I started kind of looking into a few years ago. And because, yeah, with the aesthetic facial acupuncture stuff, of course, I'm seeing a fair amount of people who have either had Botox or are interested in Botox. And for me, the big thing comes down to making sure that people are informed and they're getting full informed consent.
Like
Because,
knowing what the possible
yeah,
could be.
yes, because especially with the cosmetic use, most people that I've talked to have been like, "Yeah, you just get a little in your head and it wears off in a couple months. It's no big deal."
Hmm.
No, this is botulism toxin. Botox, botulism toxin. Botulism is one of the most toxic substances on the planet. And so you are literally putting poison into your body. Now, just like in traditional Chinese medicine, we use toxic substances medicinally.
Hmm.
So I'm not against Botox when it's used therapeutically. Um, However, when it comes to adding, you know, more toxins to a body that's already been overloaded with toxins, then that's where problems can occur. And you can see cases of iatrogenic botulism poisoning.
So so what does that look like? And when you say iatrogenic, can you elaborate on what that means for anybody that
Sure,
doesn't understand that
iatrogenic
term?
is just fancy medical term for meaning that the medicine caused it. And when it comes to migraine patients, they're receiving a lot more of the toxin than what the cosmetic patients actually get. Your cosmetic patients, can get anywhere from, 10 to about 50 units of Botox in an average treatment.
Mhm.
Whereas on average, a migraine patient is getting about 150 units
Wow.
of
I was not
Botox.
aware of that.
Yeah. And Botox units, they're actually measured, these units are measured by their lethal dose. What is it? The LD. It's the lethal dose that it takes to kill one mouse.
Oh, yeah,
That's
I'm familiar
that's
with that.
what a single unit of Botox is measured in. And so when
Seems
you
like such
get
an odd thing, like, "Here's how much will kill a mouse." So how many of
yes,
those can we give to a person
uh-huh,
safely
that's
without
exactly
killing
it.
them?
And so you can get Botox, it goes in, basically shuts down communication between the nerve and the muscle. And
Mm.
that's why it's so effective for certain kinds of migraines, or in the case of my work, why it alleviates muscle wrinkles caused by muscle
'Cause
problems.
it's a neurotoxin, right? I mean, it
Yes,
basically stops a nerve from what, firing? From the
that's exactly
synapses
it.
from working?
Yep,
So we're
that's
literally, like,
exactly what happens.
injecting something that is stopping that nerve communication from occurring.
Yes.
And I mean, you could
Uh-huh.
see how that would help, like, a migraineur, for example. I mean, if they're getting these pain signals, like, I mean, from an acupuncture standpoint, it's not uncommon to work, like, these upper cervical vertebrae there to have a modulatory effect on those nerves. So, I mean, they're essentially using this to deaden that nerve signal to relieve pain. Do
Yep.
you know why it is that there's so much more, like, such a higher dose used on, like, a migraineur versus, like, somebody that's using for cosmetic purposes?
Well, I think it might I'm not a doctor, so but my thought is you're basically working with more muscles. There's a lot more muscle, there's a lot more tissue there, so you've got
That's
to
fair, there's a lot of that
use more
in the back of the
toxin.
neck.
So that would be my guess,
That's
but,
fascinating.
it'd
You
be
know
good
what, I guess
opportunity.
I would never begrudge somebody doing that. I mean, I've suffered so many headaches and so many migraines in my life, and without knowing better, if I had known that as a potential, I very likely may have used that myself. Because I mean, they put you out. I mean, there were times where I literally had to sit in a dark room and just hold a bag because I could do nothing else. I mean, the pain was so severe that you just have to sit there and almost, like, wait to vomit and hope that relieves some of the pressure. So I guess that my next question then is, we know that there can be, like, localized issues with that. I mean, of course, swelling, bruising, that type of thing, but some sources say that this toxin, this, botulism toxin stays localized, that doesn't go to the rest of the body. There seems to be some competing evidence on that, that it is possible for it to go elsewhere, and that begs the question, is there potential for long-term or even systemic side effects using this?
Certainly. I am an administrator on a, Facebook group called the, Botox Sport Injury Support Group,
Mm,
and they have over 40,000 members in this group.
wow.
They've got a lot, and most of these women that are in this group suffer from a lot of what looks like autoimmune issues, and so they put out a list of all of these botulism related symptoms, and I mean, I'll go through a couple of these: neck and jaw stiffness, involuntary frowning and body spasms, irritability, loss of emotion, loss of libido, adrenal dysfunction, anxiety and panic attacks, auditory hallucinations, bladder issues, brain fog, brain hypoxia, burning in the mouth, depression, diarrhea, dry mouth, facial pain, facial pressure, general anxiety, suicidal ideation,
Ooh.
sensitivity to different medications and supplements. In more extreme cases, temporary paralysis. With the migraine locations, you can get weakness in your neck. And so then you're having a hard time holding your head up.
Well, yeah, I mean,
It
you're
can
not getting a nerve
also,
signal there anymore, right? Or a
yeah,
proper nerve signal.
yep. It can also affect the throat as well. So the throat can close down. One of the gals that I had talked to had that happen. And then she was also getting increased salivation. So her throat was closing down. She was getting all this saliva, and then her neck was weak. And so, I mean, it created a pretty life threatening situation for her. The problem here is that most folks don't recognize that those symptoms can be related to the Botox. And a lot of docs won't put that together either. So that's the hard part.
It's kind of fascinating to me because, I mean, just looking at it from the lens of how I look at my headache and migraine sufferers, and one of the first things that I screen for is what's going on with their neck. Because whether your headaches are cervicogenic, meaning they're being originated by a problem in the neck, or that is an aggravating factor, it needs to be addressed in either case. And it's kind of ironic the thought that, like, if we're causing the nerve signal to some of these muscles to be weakened or deadened, and now you're struggling to hold your head up. I mean, this is one of the first things I teach my patients is that, the way our posture, the way we sit, or, like staring down at a phone like this all the time is effectively increasing the strain on the muscles of your neck and upper back. Because, I mean, we're changing the way that we're load bearing here. And I mean,
Yep.
by a matter of degrees, I mean, our head should weigh around 12 pounds. And if we're sitting erect like this, we're built to support that structure. Now, if we're like increasing the angle forward of our neck, I mean, that's going to feel like 24, 36, 48 pounds of pressure that we're using for these muscles. And people think like, oh, it must be stress. Like, no, you're holding this thing. I mean, imagine holding a bowling ball out here like this. How long do you think you're going to last? Not very long. Whereas, I mean, if you held it in here like this, you could hold that for quite a while before you're going to fatigue. So, I mean, the irony there is that, I mean, this is a major factor in dealing with headaches and migraines. And the treatment itself, in this case, may actually cause the problem to become worse over time. And then, of course, it's not uncommon that people will have injections multiple times.
Yep.
And, I mean, generally, that's what's happened when they've come to my office. They said, I've done this, but they keep coming back or it's not working. And it's usually the story that I hear is I've done this, I've done this, I've done that. That's not working. I want a more natural approach, that whole spiel.
Well, and this stuff, they say Botox wears off. Well, from what I've been learning, what Botox does is it actually stays in your system. It basically shuts down the nerve endings,
Mm.
and then your body has to grow new nerve endings around that nerve that's been more or less sliced with the toxin. So Botox sticks around in that nerve, and then the nerve has to kind of grow around it. That's when the Botox wears off. It's just your body's basically growing new nerve endings rather than Botox wearing off. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, I guess what I hear is it becomes a very band aid like treatment.
Yeah. And so you can have this toxin basically continuing to build. The more you receive it, the more it builds in your body.
And so by extension, the difference between like something like what you're doing with like a facial rejuvenation type acupuncture is almost polar opposite. I mean,
Yes.
one is essentially disempowering so that you don't see the flaw. The other one is empowering, producing, I mean, you could probably explain this better, but producing like different factors in the skin so that the tone gets better, right?
Yep.
More
Yeah. The
elastin
idea,
and collagen and whatnot in the skin.
that's exactly it. Botox freezes things and shuts things down. Whereas the work that I do with the aesthetic facial acupuncture, we're bringing more circulation to the area. We're bringing more energy to the area. We're enlivening it.
Mm.
We're working with the body's innate capacity for rejuvenation. Rather than trying to shut things down, we're bringing more energy and more blood to the area. So we're doing just exactly the opposite.
It's like one is empowering and one is disempowering. I mean, we hear those terms a lot nowadays, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, and
This is like from a physical sense, though.
oh, good grief. You can get into the physical sense, you can get into the emotional sense. I mean, there's studies that have shown that when we engage our facial muscles, it helps us feel our feelings.
Yes. I've read about this recently as well.
hmm So when you're getting Botox, for example, right here in between the eyebrows, which is related to the liver area, there have been studies that said, well, yeah, Botox injections help reduce symptoms of depression because, well, you inject it in here and people don't feel their depression as much. Well, what's depression? Depression is more or less anger turned inward. Well, anger
Mm.
associates with the liver. This is the liver area of the face. So basically, you're creating more liver stagnation and you're stifling that expression of anger. So then it resides in the body, creates more liver qi stagnation, and problems show up elsewhere. You're masking the problem. So when we do facial acupuncture and I'm needling this area, I'm talking to my patients about, okay, well, what are healthy expressions of anger, irritation, frustration?
Mm.
And how can you better feel your feelings? Because once you are feeling those feelings and actually processing them rather than masking them or shutting them down, then the body begins to heal and we see changes in the lines.
Really fascinating, honestly. And I coming back to this potential for side effect of depression and anxiety. I mean, I think about people that are in chronic pain, and there's a high correlation between chronic pain and depression and anxiety. And it can be a very chicken and egg kind of thing. But what they've found is that if somebody already suffers from like depression and anxiety, they'll tend more to insomnia as well. They'll have a decreased pain tolerance, and they'll tend or trend towards more chronic pain or chronic pain type syndromes. And I mean, in
Hmm.
you mentioned the liver from a Chinese medicine standpoint. I mean, I deal a lot with chronic pain, not just headaches and migraines, but many chronic pain issues. And addressing the liver from a Chinese medicine standpoint is necessary in virtually 100% of them. So now, I mean, again, if we have a treatment that is potentially causing depression and anxiety, it might actually be making the issue worse over time. Because I mean, we really, and it is something that has to be addressed in order to properly eliminate this chronic pain issue. I mean, you almost can't completely get rid of it without properly addressing the depression and anxiety piece of
Yep.
it. I was, looking at some of your different posts and whatnot, and some of these about how, they talk about that the Botox stays put, but then there does seem to be some competing research on this. And, I got on the Johns Hopkins website, and, you know, I started to look at some of the potential for side effects or contraindications on there. And one of the things that it says is that if the toxin accidentally spreads into your body, you could notice, I mean, some of these nerve related issues that you were talking about, vision problems, muscle weakness, trouble speaking or swallowing, bladder control issues, difficulty breathing. I mean, these are all like nervous system generated issues. So, I mean, if this toxin does make its way into your circulation, I mean, it can cause, it's from the sounds of it, nerve problems virtually anywhere it goes.
Yep.
And then I even looked even more because one of the contraindications here was for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Now, I mean, if it truly stayed localized, why should that be a contraindication? So I looked further and I thought this was really interesting. There was an NIH study done on this, National Institute of Health, that showed, women having some Botox injections in their face, and they did find small amounts of it in the breast milk after the injection. So, I mean, some of it, maybe not all of it, will or can find its way into the rest of your body or to other parts of your body, which I think, speaks to that issue. And of course, I mean, you work with patients all the time. No two people are alike. I mean, some people it might say more localized, some people it might make their way in for any variety of reasons. I thought that was very fascinating and very telling. And I guess I feel like the same as you, that we should have full knowledge of what we're doing to our bodies, and we should be made aware of these things before we engage in them. Because, I imagine there's plenty of people on these forums that don't really feel like they were given the right amount of information to make an educated decision before getting
Oh,
this
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the majority of people, when you talk to them about Botox, have no idea that the FDA has a black box warning on the label for Botox. And what that means is this stuff can potentially kill you. Nobody knows that. Very few people know that. And it's just, oh, yeah, I just go in and I get a little tweak and it's no big deal. Well, it may or it may not. The main thing I really believe is you got to get informed consent. Fully be informed about what you're putting into your body and what the risks are. And
100%.
people aren't having those conversations.
It's important, especially this day and age, because it is such a popular treatment that's being used.
Well, what I tell folks is it's the way I look at Botox is the same way I look at eating McDonald's. You know, Botox is like McDonald's. You can get it. It's effective. It'll fill your belly. It'll scratch that itch. It's cheap. and it'll do the job. But is it going to nourish you in the long run? The work that I do, it's more like Whole Foods, you know? It may be a little bit more expensive up front, but it's going to nourish you in the long term and it's going to keep you healthier. So, we live in America. You get to choose what you want to do with yourself. And hey, if you want to use Botox, rock and roll. That is your prerogative. Just be informed. And then once you're informed, great, rock and roll. But like I say, most people just don't have any idea about the risks. I think it's just something very simple to use.
It's fascinating. It's sort of like this, this want for an immediate reward, instant gratification.
Oh
Something
yeah.
that my wife and I will say from time to time is, well, you'll hear one of us say like, I love my past self because we'll look and we'll think to the future and like, hey, we know we've got this coming up. So we're going to take, meat out of the freezer, or we know we've got a busy weekend. Let's make sure all the dishes are done, or just whatever it is, making sure that we are planning for the future. And then we'll get to that point in time and be like, oh, that's right. I already took care of all of this. I love my past self. So, it's kind of a fascinating ideology, but we are responsible for taking care of our future self as though it were a child.
Hmm.
So, and that means, how we eat, how we manage stress, what we put into our bodies is extremely important in that regard.
Reminds me of, I can't remember what episode of The Simpsons. It's There's a scene there where Homer's got a problem and he says, "That's a problem for future Homer." And I think we look at that the same way in our cultures. It's like, okay, I'm just going to do what I want to do now, and that'll be a problem for my future self later down the road.
Well, then does that start to build some kind of resentment for yourself? I'm of the opposite mind of like, I'm gonna do everything in my power to not create more work for my future self. So like when I'm like, at the end of the day, I've been treating patients. You might be a little bit tired. It's like, no, I'm still gonna take care of the things that need to be taken care of because future me is going to appreciate that. And
Yep.
it's gonna cause less stress. By extension, maybe, avoid some of the emotional strain that could lead to something like a headache or, you know, some kind of facial wrinkle from having not done that. Terry, one more thing. How can people reach out to you if they want more information, if they're interested?
If they want more information about my work, they can hop on my website, which is foxhavenaesthetics.com. And that's with the British spelling of aesthetics. So AE. I'm on Instagram. My Instagram handle is at foxhavenacu. I'm on Facebook. You can find me there too. Same handle. Where else? I think I'm on Twitter. I don't do a whole lot of Twitter. X, I guess it's X now. So I'm on the social medias. You can find me on the social medias. But Instagram and Facebook seem to be where I'm at most often. And then, of course, my website.
You really hit gold with that last name of yours. You can do so much with Fox. Volesky, it's Bohemian. Most people can't even pronounce my last name.
I'm blessed. What can I say?
Well, thanks again, my friend. I appreciate the taking the time to talk with me about this. I've certainly learned a bit. I hope other people can gain something of value from this. Appreciate it.
You bet. Anytime.
Thanks.